I'm going to show you my process for how I made this short film from ideation to filming all the way down to the final product.
First thing that you need in order to actually make a short film is an idea. That way you can build upon it to actually create something from it. Now, ideas can be either inspired or original. If you're just starting out, it's better to have inspired ideas where you take from something that you like to watch or something that really just gets your creativity going. Plus, if you try to recreate something that you enjoy watching or some sort of movie, you'll learn a lot more, a lot faster than normal. Now, personally, I've always loved driving. It's almost like a safe place for me. I take drives to listen to music, to sit with my thoughts, or come up with ideas. And usually ideas flow like water whenever I drive. I start thinking about one thing that I wanted to recreate, or maybe a creative transition that I wanted to do, and the rest just sort of fall in place from there. So actually, just the other day, I came across this really cool transition on TikTok, and I tried to make sense of it in my head. So I was thinking about ways that I could do it with my technical skills and knowledge right now. So I really began to break down this transition, and I've realized that there were 3 parts to it. 1, the initial clip that would then lead into the next clip. 2, the actual transition, which I figured would be more of like a stop motion from custom sketches. And 3, the final clip where you have the actual sketch as a prop in the clip. So that way all 3 can be combined. You have the first clip that goes into the stop motion and ends with the prop. So I took this inspiration and I wanted to make something from it. Something strange, something experimental, something interesting. I pictured this man standing underneath a street light right before he walked off. When he walked off, it would turn into that sketch transition to go into the next frame, and I saw this hand come out of the darkness and crumple up that frame to pull it back into the darkness. Well, so at first I was really happy with this idea, and I was thinking about those 2 clips on how I would record them, and then the visions kept coming. I saw this face that was coming out of the darkness almost like it was emerging from underneath the water. Then it zoomed into his mouth and you saw an eye open where it continued to zoom through the pupil and would end on that initial clip for a perfect loop. Now, I've also seen that eye transition a lot before, and I was really stoked to be able to try it, especially with my new lens that I knew would make it possible. Now, I saw all of these visions in my head, and I was super excited to actually get them done because it was stunning. It was stunning, at least in my mind. So in order to keep this idea, I made sure to grab my phone and write the idea down. Stop waiting to see.
After you've got an idea, the next step in creating a short film is to plan it out. For my specific idea, it was pretty easy. I started by creating the shot list, since it was already in my head just thinking about it in the car. With the shot list, I usually begin by brainstorming and writing my ideas down. Then I take a bunch of those shots and move them from my shot ideas into my shot list. The shot list is extremely important because it's the framework for the whole video, at least how I do it. Once I got my shot list all written down, the next challenge that I had was to craft a script around the visuals. So personally, I wouldn't say that I'm much of a writer, so this took me a while with many terrible ideas and lots of research. All of that eventually led to this short, impactful script. I was pretty happy with the script, so I sent it around to a couple friends to get their thoughts, and thankfully they were all pretty impressed with the message that was coming through. This feedback was such a boost for the next steps that I had to take. These next 3 steps are crucial in making a short film. Number 1, plan out how to execute each shot. What I mean by this is plan out how the shot will look in terms of lighting, if there are any camera moves, what your camera setup will be, all the way down to your lens and even the camera settings that you're going to be using. Number 2, get organized. Take your shots, group them up in an order by sets or by camera setup that would run the smoothest when filming. For this specific idea, I broke it down by sets. So there's the street light, there's the pool, and there's a studio space. Once I got all of these sets nailed down, I organized the shots into each of those sets by complexity. I went from simplest to most complex. When you're thinking about the complexity of your shots, take into account everything that you've already thought about. For instance, your lighting setups, the camera setups that you have, the emotions that the actor is going to need to portray, as well as how the actor is going to be moving in the scene itself. All of that should help you plan the order that you shoot in. After you finish your shot grouping, I highly recommend making a list of all the gear that you will be needing for each of those sets. This will help you stay a lot more organized and not forget anything when it comes to shooting. And number 3, find talent. Surprisingly, this part was one of the easiest. I posted a casting call to a Facebook group, and within minutes, I had several actors and talent agents reaching out to me. I was extremely impressed. Personally, I've always been sort of afraid of this process, but it was very rewarding to actually do it. I then ended up scheduling calls with the actors that had reached out to see who would fit the role best. After about a week of calls, I made my decision and the ball started rolling. Now comes the time to see if your planning will pay off. There's no turning back now because we have made it to production. I've always loved seeing how production goes. It's a test of how well you plan things and how you can problem solve on the fly. There are only 2 nights to finish everything and no pickup dates for any reshoots, so everything has to be done right. In order to make sure that I had everything for the shots, I made sure to refer to the gear lists that I made earlier. Now the first night came and we ended up eating before we headed out to the first set, the street light. All right, so this street light is already a part of my neighborhood. So thankfully, that's already there. I made sure to go through and check off everything from my gear list. That way I have it all with me and I can be a lot less worried when arriving on set. Right. When we arrived at this location, the first thing that I needed to do was set things up. I started with the camera so that I could get composition and exposure right, and then I moved on to the lighting. So at first when I pulled out my light, I had an idea to set it up to sort of be a fake moonlight. I originally wanted it behind the actor, but it didn't really work out too well because the street light didn't light him up exactly how I thought it would. And this sort of thing always happens on any set to anyone, but I love it. It creates a fun situation to find a solution for. So I decided to move the light from behind him to in front of him and sort of be motivated by this street light. That way it actually looks like the street light is lighting him up how I thought it would initially. So thankfully that finished up the lighting for this set. Now I can move on to further details. All right, so now we move on to the blocking, or how the actor moves in the scene. So I had gaff tape with me and I used that to put little T marks on the ground. And T mark is basically a stopping point for the actor to reach. It's something that's visible for him, but invisible to the camera. That way he can move precisely from point to point. Now, his motion that I wanted him to do in this was fairly easy. It was literally a straight line, so I thankfully set that up rather quickly. However, blocking on some sets can get pretty complex and use multiple T marks. So after I solidified the blocking and gave him some direction, we shot the first shot and moved straight into the second shot. And this is where I ran into my next problem. For this second shot, the lens that I wanted to use would not work with the light that we had, no matter how hard I tried. So this allowed for some more problem solving and actually led to one of my favorite shots from this entire shoot so far.
So having finished those additional shots that I had to do while I was problem solving, that led for a wrap at this set. So now let's head to our next location, the pool. Initially, I thought that this was going to be a very complicated shot. I knew that I needed a couple things. One, I needed the water to be black, so I knew that the lighting would be kind of complicated. Two, I needed to cover my camera because it wasn't weather sealed, so if it got wet, it would have been completely destroyed. Three, I needed to shoot in slow motion, which means that I would also need the correct amount of light in order to do so. And four, I also have another lighting effect that was going to be happening, which is a lightning effect. And in order to time this correctly, I needed to figure out a way to communicate with the actual actor who was going to be in the water. Now that sounds like a lot to keep track of and to figure out, but at the end of the day, it was a lot less complex than I thought, and it went really smooth. All my worrying was for nothing, and the street light took longer than this shot. For the black water, I ended up using a black piece of fabric, which I used to use in light painting, and I spread it across the bottom of the little shelf that's up here in the pool. So that way I had a black backdrop basically, and I was able to set up the lights. So I had one light on the left side of the pool here. That was my 720B, and this was a soft light. So I had this with my softbox in order to get a fill light. Then on the right side of the pool here, I had my 300D, and a spotlight mount. That way I could control the light and have it hit just the actor as soon as he's coming out of the water. And this light on the right was also the one doing the lightning effect. Now I made sure to place these lights directly across from each other so I could get a clamshell sort of lighting and I can control it a lot easier. Now comes the communication with the actor. So we came up with this way to where when he would submerge fully and hit the bottom, he would tap my leg, which was right next to his since I was basically standing over him, in order to tell me that he's fully submerged. Once I knew that information, I would then trigger the lightning effect and tap his leg for him to come up out of the water. That ended up working extremely well, and I'm really happy that I was able to collaborate with him easily and efficiently in order to get the shots that we needed. Once we got that shot exactly how we wanted it to be, that was a wrap on day one. Both sets done, all shots finished. Now I really have my work cut out for me going into day two. The first thing that I had to do before starting production on day two was make a sketch. I took the shot from day one, put it into DaVinci, cut it up at the right spots that I wanted it to be cut at. Then I took some screen grabs from the video so that I can create the sketch transition. So the idea was to take these screenshots, print them out, use them so that I can trace them and make custom sketches to use for a stop motion sketch transition. However, this shot that we're going to be working on in day two only needs the last frame. I don't need the full sketch transition quite yet, so all I needed to get was that last frame sketched out to where we can use it for a practical effect. So I set up a bright light behind a window, then I took that printed out frame, taped it to the back of a blank piece of paper, and then taped those two together to a window. That way the light would shine through the print onto the paper, and I could trace it with pencil to make a custom sketch. After I got the tracing done, I took that tracing, put it into my scanner, that way I could have a digital copy and actually make prints in order to use in the practical effect so that we can have multiple takes rather than just having to get it right with just one. Having finished that, I was pretty relieved and immediately moved into filming for day two. So the filming started with the eye shot, which was pretty simple to do. So I had the actor sit down and I used my special probe lens that's designed to get very close to things and make them look larger than life. I set that up on my slider to make the camera move to get the shot, or at least what I thought would work at the beginning. Then came the complex shot, or so I thought. I was really worried about getting it right, so I asked the actor if he had any ideas on how I could rig up a piece of paper in order for him to crumple it. He had the best idea ever. Something that I personally would have never thought of. He suggested using paper clips to hold up the paper, and I tied some fishing line to the paper clips and hung them on some light stands. Now, when the two paper clips were put on the corners of the paper, they suspended it exactly where I needed it to be and made it perfectly reusable. So we could do take after take after take after take without having to worry about the actual rigging getting messed up. That idea could not have worked better. We ended up getting the shot pretty quickly and just moved on to using the extra prints that we had to do some more fun, creative, and funky ways of crumpling it and tearing the paper and whatever you could think of. Once we got through all the prints,
That was a wrap on day 2. We wrapped a little bit early, so we actually celebrated by going to Wegmans to get some food and some dessert. And although I wrapped with the talent, I still needed to create one crucial part for this entire video: the stop motion sketch transition. The first thing that I did is I went back into DaVinci, went through all the screenshots that I took, which I took from every third frame, so that then I could export those and print them out so that then they could be traced in the same way that I traced that last frame. Now, this tracing process was really long, but honestly, it was pretty peaceful. I just put on some music or podcast or a video or something that I wanted to listen to while I just continually taped and traced. That's all I did for hours. All of that hard work gave me about 1 second in actual stop motion time, but I am really pleased with how it came out. Having gotten that sketch transition done, the next step was the magic making process, the editing. So I pulled the rest of the footage into DaVinci and threw it into the timeline. So I roughly pieced them together how I best saw fit before jumping into color grading. When I jumped into color grading, I made sure to get the color exactly how I wanted it to before I jumped into effects and transitions to really piece the video together. I got all the visuals where I wanted them to be and moved on to the sound design. This is really what pulls the video together, in my opinion. Sound is 50% of the viewing experience. I began with the ambient sounds, like the crickets and the bugs that usually are chirping at night. Then I moved on to the Foley, which is the sounds that you think you would hear when you see them, like footsteps or a splash in the water. And I finished with the transition, anticipation, and impact sounds. These are risers, which build tension, whooshes to help transitions, and hits, which are deep booming sounds that add emphasis to an action. Once all the sounds were set in place, I then went into the mixing. The goal with the mixing is to get all of the sounds to combine into one another to make it sound natural. Once I got all the sound designing done, got my first mix done, I made sure to export that section for my sound cut so that I can review it a lot easier than in DaVinci Resolve with all the color grading and all the other effects that are still being rendered while I listen. The magic is in the work that you're avoiding. That's something that I've come to find true over the years, and especially in my videography career. I avoided editing this project for a very long time because I was really afraid that I would screw it all up. Thankfully, it turned out almost exactly how I envisioned it. This gave me the momentum that I needed to upload it, to send it off, and to create an IMDb with it. Creating an IMDb is actually a very detailed and impressive process to go through. If you'd like to know how to make an IMDb page for your film, let me know in the comments down below and I'll make a video on it. I feel really satisfied seeing the completed work as a whole. It's been such a great learning experience going through this whole process of actually making this film. This was the first time that I ever created a stop motion video, and I cannot wait to see what else I do with that technique in the future. And I'm extremely happy to have made some moodier images and to really have brought those creative transitions to life. Taking these creative shots that I had in my head and trying to figure out a technical way to actually make them come to life has been quite the challenge, and I've learned so much, and I really hope that I was able to bring you guys along with me. And personally, I find the most fun when there's a challenge that needs solutions. And this video feels like just the beginning of a greater learning journey, and I cannot wait to see what comes from it. And that is one way you can make a short film by yourself. I hope you guys enjoyed and maybe even learned something from this. I'm happy I shared my process with you, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.
You're lost. Breathe. Remind yourself who you're trying to be.